Chun Yong has a portal which takes him to an apocalyptic world where gold and silver is considered trash while food is an SSS rank ultra-rare commodity. While others struggle to survive, he has already reaches the pinnacle of life by exchanging spicy snacks for gold and future technology. In a desert with not much sign of life, everything suddenly goes crazy as we hear a scream. A guy screams that he's dead over and over. He keeps running from some monsters that are right behind him. Suddenly, one pops up right in front of him, but he uses a sliding tackle and dodges the creature. As he looks back, he says that the monster actually knows how to set an ambush. He also says he just arrived in this world and wonders if he's really going to die right here. As he keeps running, he sees something in the distance and says that it looks like cooking smoke. He immediately gets excited and starts running even faster, saying that it must be a human settlement. He says that as long as he can get there, he'll be safe, but suddenly a stone is in the way. His leg hits it and he starts falling, shouting, "Oh crap," while almost crying. As he falls to the ground, he starts rolling. After tumbling around for a bit, he finally ends up flat on the ground while the monsters start catching up to him. The guy immediately gets back up and starts running again, shouting that he will never randomly transmigrate again. Just as he gets close to the human settlement, he suddenly hears a gunshot. A monster right behind him gets taken down and falls directly on top of him. It's a pretty weird situation, and he's clearly terrified. Then the person who fired the shot starts reloading. As more monsters come rushing in, they all get shot down as well. The guy says that he's saved. As he stands up with the monster still on top of him, he looks back and sees a lady. She asks how long he plans on hugging that thing. He suddenly realizes the monster has definitely gotten a little too attached to him. Pushing it away, he tells it not to touch him. Then he thanks the lady, but the lady immediately points the gun right at his face. She tells him not to move and asks for his name. The guy quickly raises his hands in surrender and says his name is Chun Yong, the Yong from Sunshine. The lady asks why he suddenly appeared near their camp. Chun Yong says that if he told her he just got lost and somehow ended up here, would she believe him? The lady says he's still trying to lie to her because she clearly heard him talking about transmigrating earlier. Hearing that, the guy starts panicking in his head and thinks that if he tells her the truth, she'll definitely think he's crazy. Then the lady says he's not talking and that it looks like he doesn't want to live. Suddenly she smells something and says it smells really good. She immediately asks what is in his bag. The guy says, "Oh, you mean this?" After taking something out, he explains that he was just about to eat the spicy strip when he ran into a zombie, so he had to quickly stuff it into his bag. The lady looks confused and asks if he just said it's food. She's clearly suspicious, but she still keeps the gun pointed at him. Chun Yong says that's right and asks if she wants to taste it. The lady thinks the color looks strange and wonders if it might be poisonous. But at the same time, it smells really good, and she hasn't eaten anything for 2 days. In the end, she decides to take it anyway. As she's about to eat it, she thinks she'll eat first and ask questions later. The moment she takes a bite, it's like she reaches heaven. She says it's unbelievably delicious and describes it as the aroma of oil and flavor mixed perfectly with the seasonings. Chun Yong feels like this is a complete victory. In his mind, he says that's exactly how it should be. In an apocalyptic wasteland, no one can refuse food, especially food this good. Then Chun Yong starts explaining his situation. He says he used to be just an ordinary run-of-the-mill wage slave. A few days ago, he was suddenly fired by the company and lost his only source of income. He was feeling really depressed, but unexpectedly, he found a strange ring inside a box of snacks he bought online. He explains that when he put the ring on, he suddenly found himself in a very terrifying world. At that moment, he remembers looking around and thinking that the creature in front of him was a huge rat and wondering where he even was. The rat immediately roared and charged at him. In panic, he shouted that he wanted to go home right now. The moment he said that, he suddenly found himself back in the real world, standing right in front of the empty box his boss had given him after firing him. Looking around in shock, he realized that even though he didn't understand the reason, the ring allowed him to travel freely between reality and the apocalypse. Based on all his years of watching anime, he quickly came to the conclusion that food is hard currency in an apocalyptic world. As long as he uses this advantage well, he believes he can climb to the very peak of life and get everything a guy could ever want. Back in the present, the lady who saved him is still enjoying the taste of the snack. But soon the last piece is gone, and she suddenly says in a slightly embarrassed voice that she finished it. She says she's really sorry and explains that it was just too delicious, so she couldn't hold back. Chun Yong says it's okay. He explains that the organization he belongs to doesn't lack food, but it does lack many other things, which is why he was sent out to exchange supplies. The lady looks confused and says she can't believe that there's an organization in this world that doesn't lack food. Chunyang says she's looking at someone from that organization right now. Hearing that, the lady quickly asks if he can hire her. She explains that she's very familiar with the area and whatever he wants to exchange food for, she can help him find it. She says her commission would just be 15 packs of the spicy strips he gave her earlier per month. Chunyang thinks for a moment and says it's not impossible, but the problem is that he knows absolutely nothing about her. The lady asks what he wants to know. Chunyang says he wants to know her name. She replies that her name is Lilu. Then he asks her gender. She responds by asking if he can't see it for himself. Then he asks her age. She says she's 19. Chunyang looks at her and says that she calls that 19. He comments that for someone living in the apocalypse, her nutrition seems a bit too plentiful. After coughing for a moment, he says that considering how big she is, he'll hire her. He tells her the monthly salary will be 15 packs of spicy strips. The lady immediately gets excited. Lilu thanks him and calls him boss. Chunyang then casually asks if she ever thought about taking him out and snatching the food. Lilu says she's not stupid. She explains that she can tell the difference between having one full meal and being full every meal. Then Lilu says they should go and that she'll take him to the camp. Chunyang tells her to lead the way. Lilu announces that they have arrived and says this is their camp, Gray Rat District D. However, after looking around, Chunyang thinks to himself that this camp is worse than a slum. Still, he decides that since he's already here, he might as well make the best of it. He thinks the first thing he should do is see if he can get his hands on anything valuable. As they walk around the camp and look at the people living there, Lilu tells him not to be nervous. She explains that he's an outsider, so it's normal for everyone to be wary of him. Then she says this is her home and invites him inside to rest for a bit. Chunyang thinks to himself that he's about to enter a pretty girl's home and feels a little excited about it. But the moment he steps inside, he becomes quite disappointed and comments that her lifestyle is very simple. Lilu tells him to sit down first. She pours some water into a cup and hands it to him. Then she says he shouldn't look down on Gray Rat District D just because it's a small camp. She explains that even though the sparrow may be small, it's still has all the vital organs. She then tells him to just say what he wants to exchange the food for, because as long as the camp has it, she guarantees she can find it for him. Chunyang says he needs some gold and silver and asks if she knows what those are. Lilu repeats the words gold and silver and then asks why he would want that kind of trash. Hearing this, Chunyang's mind almost explodes. He thinks to himself that the kind of trash she's talking about costs 800 per gram where he comes from. He explains that gold and silver were very valuable before the Great Cataclysm. Lilu responds by saying that you can't eat gold and that nowadays everything is traded through bartering. Chunyang clears his throat and says that since this is their first trade, what matters isn't exactly what they exchange, but establishing mutual trust so they can pave the way for future transactions. He then opens his bag and shows her a large amount of spicy snacks and some cold drinks. When Lilu sees them, she lets out a shocked wow. Chunyang then says that as long as the deal works out, 1/10 of the food in the bag will be hers, and that it won't affect the commission he already promised her. Lilu can hardly believe it. She says that even if it's meant to build trust, using precious food to exchange for useless gold would be far too big of a loss. But Chunyang simply tells her to do as he says. He tells her he'll leave the supplies with her and that he'll wait there for her to return. Lilu nods and says okay, boss, and promises she definitely won't let down his trust. She grabs her gun and prepares to head out, saying she'll be back as soon as possible. As she leaves, Chunyang thinks to himself that the bag of snacks cost his last 100 yuan, so it has to work. He then lies down and complains that there's no internet and no signal, and that it's really boring. After a while, he decides to look around the room. While doing that, he notices a strip of paper and wonders if it's a newspaper. He takes a closer look and reads the date, Gregorian calendar year 2235. Then the next line completely blows his mind. It talks about the Great Cataclysm, nuclear bombs, genetic pollution, and zombies running rampant. About an hour later, Chunyang finally pieces everything together. He says that now he understands. This is Blue Star 200 years in the future. The Great Cataclysm Lilu mentioned was actually a nuclear war. Tens of thousands of nuclear bombs wiped out half of Blue Star's population. On top of that, it changed the entire planet's ecology and created the wasteland that exists now. After realizing this, Chunyang says that it means he didn't travel through space. He traveled through time. Just then, the door suddenly opens and Lilu says she's back. She shows him a bag and explains that there's very little gold and silver left in the camp. She says that what she brought is basically all of it because since it's truly useless now, no one bothers collecting it anymore. Chen doesn't say anything at first, but when he opens the bag and sees the glittering metal inside, the shine almost blinds him. Staring at it in shock, he blurts out that it's unbelievably shiny. After taking all the gold into his hands, Chen feels extremely happy. He starts laughing to himself and says that if the wasteland didn't produce someone like him, Chen, then the ages would be like a long night. Then Li Lu speaks up. She tells him that the value of the food he gave is far above the value of the gold and silver. Because of that, she took the liberty of exchanging it for a Tier 1 enhancement serum for him. She explains that although it's only the lowest level, the purity of this Tier 1 enhancement serum is very high, can be injected directly, and there are no risks. Li Lu also points out that he's obviously just an ordinary person, not an enhanced human. With this serum, dealing with a few low-level zombies shouldn't be a problem. She reminds him that the outside world is dangerous everywhere, and luck can't protect him forever. Chen coughs awkwardly and says that the organization he belongs to is quite powerful, so there's basically no danger during their journeys. He says the troublesome part is only the trading phase, but he still thanks her anyway. Then he packs up his bag and says that the first trade went very smoothly, so he'll head back for now. He tells her he'll come back tomorrow and that he'll settle her monthly salary then. As he starts walking away, he says he's leaving. Watching him go, Li Lu thinks to herself that someone who can travel alone through the wilderness without any danger must be full of secrets. But then she shrugs it off and thinks that in the wasteland, everyone has their own secrets. She starts eating some more of the snacks and says they're incredibly delicious. Then she thinks that as long as he can really keep providing food, that's all that matters. Later in the wasteland, Chen stops at a quiet spot and says that this place should be good enough since there's no one around. He reaches out and touches the air. Suddenly, with a flash, he disappears and returns to the real world, or rather, back in time. Once he's back, he quickly opens the bag and says he wants to check something. Inside, he sees all the gold he brought with him. Realizing that the gold is still there, he says that he's not dreaming. He then thinks that as long as he finds a gold shop to exchange this for money, he'll be rich. He tells himself that he, Chen is about to reach the peak of life. However, he also realizes he needs to control the amount of gold he exchanges at one time, otherwise it might scare people. Looking around carefully, he thinks that after all, there's no way he could explain the origin of this gold to anyone. After thinking about it, he finally lets out a sigh of relief. Then Chen looks at the serum and wonders if he should use the enhancement serum. He thinks that Li Lu has a point. His body is too weak in the apocalypse. Right now, he can't even beat a regular zombie. If he wants to establish a foothold in that world, he has to strengthen himself first. Then another thought crosses his mind. He complains that the thing doesn't even come with an instruction manual and says they really don't care about user experience. After thinking for a moment, he decides to just go for it and injects the serum. The serum immediately enters his bloodstream, but at first he doesn't feel any changes. He comments that it seems like nothing happened. Suddenly his heart starts beating extremely powerfully, and the serum bottle in his hand shatters from the pressure. He begins to feel intense pain and starts screaming, saying it hurts so much that it feels like every muscle in his body is being torn apart. The pain doesn't stop and lasts for quite a while, but slowly his muscles begin to grow and reshape. When it finally ends, he looks down at himself and realizes he's completely jacked. He asks if it's finally over and wonders if that body is really his. He looks at his muscles and says the muscle lines rival Arnold's. He also checks the top of his head and jokes that it hasn't become pointy either. He then comments that doomsday technology is really domineering. After calming down, he thinks about what Li Lu said earlier. She mentioned that this serum was only the lowest level. He starts wondering that if a higher grade serum were used, could it turn someone into something like One Punch Man? Just then, a voice calls from outside and asks Chen to help open the door. Chen says he's coming and goes to open it. A girl named Shuya walks in. She's an 18th tier actress and also Chen Yang's roommate. She apologizes and explains that she forgot her keys. Chen tells her there's no need to be polite since they're roommates anyway. However, the moment Shuya looks at him, she freezes, as if struck by an arrow of passion. Shuya suddenly lets out a giggle and starts walking toward him. Chen gets a little confused and asks Shuya what's wrong with her. Shuya looks at him and says she never noticed before that he's actually so stacked. Then she mentions that she didn't pass her audition today and says he must have come to comfort her on purpose. But as she gets a little too close, Chun-Yang panics. He quickly says no and starts running away, shouting that he just forgot to put on clothes. He rushes into his room and shuts the door behind him. Standing there, he starts thinking that Shuya probably thinks he's a pervert now. After worrying about it for a moment, he decides to forget about it and tells himself that selling the gold is the priority right now. So he heads outside. As he walks down the street, he suddenly notices that the weight of his body feels almost non-existent. Everything feels incredibly light. A moment later, he looks at a sign far ahead and realizes he can clearly read the text from hundreds of meters away. While walking, he also starts noticing sounds much farther away than before. At one point, he overhears a woman gossiping about how old Li's wife cheated on him. After hearing that from such a distance, Chun-Yang realizes that his hearing has clearly been enhanced too. He concludes that the enhancement serum didn't just increase his strength, but improved his overall physical fitness in a very comprehensive way. He then thinks about how even after a nuclear war, the technology in the wasteland world is still 200 years ahead of the present. The value of that world is definitely worth further exploration. Soon he arrives at Lin's gold shop. Looking at the store, Chun-Yang thinks that large jewelry chains might refuse to buy gold with unknown origins, so a private gold shop like this is the safer choice. After entering the shop, he's greeted by a receptionist. Chun-Yang asks if the boss is in because he has some business to discuss with him. The receptionist politely says that he can just tell her what he needs. Without saying much, Chun-Yang opens his bag and reveals the gold inside, explaining that he's afraid she won't be able to make that decision herself. Seeing such a large amount of gold, the receptionist is clearly shocked. Chun-Yang calmly asks what she thinks now. The receptionist quickly tells him to follow her. She leads him to the conference room of Lin's gold shop. After a moment, the boss walks in and introduces himself as Lin Tao, the owner of the shop. He politely asks how he should address him. They shake hands and Lin Tao says it's nice to meet him. Chun-Yang simply says that his surname is Chun. Lin Tao then respectfully addresses him as Mr. Chun and invites him to sit down. Chun-Yang takes out the gold and places it on the table. Lin Tao looks at the gold bars on the table and asks if Chun-Yang wants to sell them. Chun-Yang confirms that he does. Lin Tao picks up one of the bars and examines it carefully. He then says that since the transaction amount is quite large, he needs to use an instrument to verify the purity. He asks if Mr. Chun would mind. Chun-Yang tells him to go ahead. In his mind, Chun-Yang thinks that gold and silver are useless in the Doomsday Wasteland, and no one there even bothers forging gold. So he feels completely confident letting them check it however they want. A moment later, Lin Tao runs the test using the machine. The result shows a purity of 99.99%. Seeing the result, Lin Tao is surprised and thinks that it's actually all pure 9,999 gold. Chun-Yang asks what the result is. Lin Tao says the quality is very good and tells him that he can offer a buyback price of 400 yuan per gram. Hearing that number, Chun-Yang is stunned. In his excitement, he accidentally cracks the glass he's holding. In his mind, he quickly starts calculating. At 400 yuan per gram, one gold bar weighing 1 kilogram would be worth 400,000 yuan. With 3 gold bars, that would be a total of 1.2 million yuan. Just thinking about that number makes him extremely happy inside. Lin Tao says that of course Chun-Yang will need to provide a formal invoice. Chun-Yang says he doesn't have that, but assures him that the source is absolutely clean and there won't be any trouble. Lin Tao replies that words alone are no proof. Buying such a large batch at once carries significant risk for him. Chun-Yang, already cracking the glass in his hand a little more from the pressure, says that Boss Lin should be direct with him. He tells him to skip the usual sales talk meant to push the price down and just say the real offer. He adds that if he finds the price acceptable, they'll make the deal, and if not, they can just consider it as making a new friend. As he says this, he pushes one of the gold bars toward Lin. Lin Tao looks a bit nervous and says that in that case he'll take a loss and buy it for 280 yuan per gram, which comes to exactly 840,000 yuan. Chun-Yang smiles and says that now that sounds more reasonable. A moment later his phone buzzes with a notification saying that he has received a bank transfer of 840,000 yuan. Chun-Yang then places another gold bar on the table and says that the money has been received and it was a pleasure doing business. Seeing that, Lin Tao quickly says that if Mr. Chun has more goods to handle, they can continue cooperating in the future. Chun-Yang casually replies that he'll consider it. After leaving the shop, Chun-Yang thinks to himself that just 3 gold bars brought him more than 800,000 yuan. He then laughs in his mind and thinks that if he sells all the gold bars in his backpack, he'll truly become rich. Later, back at Chun Yang's residential compound, Zhou Dandan, an office worker who shares the apartment with him, is looking around and asking where her phone is. Another voice tells her that it's on the coffee table and that Su Yen is calling. As she picks up the phone, Chen Yang happens to come back and greets her, asking where she's rushing off to. Su Yen explains that Dandan just got home, but her boss suddenly called her back for overtime. Chen Yang sighs and says the timing is terrible because he just made a small fortune today and was planning to treat both of them to dinner. Dandan complains about the situation and tells Su Yen to make sure she eats enough for her share too. Su Yen laughs and says not to worry. Then Dandan turns to Chen Yang and jokingly warns him not to make a move on Xiaoya while she's gone. Chen Yang laughs and says she must be joking, asking if he really looks like that kind of person. Dan laughs and tells them to have fun before leaving. Su Yen then jokingly calls him President Chun and asks where they're eating tonight. Chen Yang suggests Li Xing Diehua. Su Yen looks shocked and asks if he's joking, because that's a 5-star place. Chen Yang calmly says he's not joking. He tells them he'll see them tonight. Later, back in his room, Chen Yang opens his bag and pulls out the remaining gold bars. Looking at them, he tells himself there's no time to waste. He decides he needs to exchange all the dozen gold bars today. So he starts visiting different jewelry shop owners one after another. Each time he sells a few bars at slightly lower prices so the shops are willing to buy them quickly without asking too many questions about invoices. The deals go smoothly and both sides are satisfied. By the end of the day, Chen Yang checks his account and sees his balance has reached 4 million yuan. Not long after, he receives a phone call from Guang Wei. Chen Yang answers and jokingly asks what's up, saying Guang Wei suddenly called and asking if he missed him. On the other side, Guang Wei asks why Chen Yang didn't tell him he lost his job. He also asks if Chen Yang still has money for rent and says he has some spare cash that Chen Yang can use for now. Hearing that, Chen Yang laughs and tells him that brother Yang isn't short on money anymore. But then something starts bothering him. He pauses and asks who told him that he lost his job and wonders if the news has really spread that far already. Guang Wei hesitates a little before explaining that Chen Yang's ex-girlfriend, Peng Jia, told him. He says she mentioned it might not be appropriate for her to help directly, so she asked Guang Wei to look out for him instead. Hearing that name, Chen Yang is surprised and says it was her. Even he feels a bit confused about it. Yang's friend says that he feels like Peng Jia still cares about him and asks why the two of them broke up. Chen Yang explains that Peng Jia's mother required her partner to be able to buy a house in Daijing. He then reminds him that he already knows his family's financial situation. His friend sighs and says that hearing this just strengthens his determination to remain a single dog. Chen Yang then asks something that suddenly comes to mind. He wonders how Peng Jia even found out about his situation, since he hasn't contacted her once since they broke up. His friend explains that it was that rich second-generation kid, Zhang Jinglong, who told her. He reminds Chen Yang that the guy has always been interested in Peng Jia. Then his friend adds something else. He says that supposedly Zhang Jinglong even bought shares in Chen Yang's old company and specifically named him to be fired just to strike at him. Hearing this, Chen Yang's mood immediately turns dark. He says coldly that it's good, very good, so that's how it really is. His friend quickly tells him to calm down and not do anything stupid. Chen Yang replies that his mind is wandering too far and asks if he really looks like the kind of person who would do something reckless. His friend says that's good to hear, then tells him he's hanging up and that he should take care. Chen Yang says goodbye as well. But the moment the call ends, Chen Yang mutters angrily that Zhang Jinglong is really shameless. After a moment, he suddenly checks the time and realizes it's getting late. He says he needs to hurry to the hotel and immediately starts running. Later, outside the hotel entrance, Chen Yang stands there waiting. He says that Su Yen told him she was almost there too and wonders where she is. Just then, a car pulls up beside him. A voice calls out to him and says he kept her waiting. Su Yen. People nearby immediately start whispering and commenting that she's so beautiful and wondering if she's some kind of celebrity. Su Yen notices Chen Yang staring and asks why he's spacing out. Chen Yang admits that they've been flatmates for 3 months, but he never realized she was actually this good looking. Su Yen smiles and says that since he's treating her to such a high-end place tonight, she can't let him lose face. She asks how she looks and whether she looks respectable enough. Chen Yang suddenly gets flustered and asks what she's doing when she grabs his hand. Su Yen casually tells him to relax and says it's just social etiquette. She asks why he's getting so nervous and pulls him along, telling him they should go inside. Later, they sit at a table with a beautiful view. Chen Yang hands her the menu and politely asks her to order. Su Yen thanks him and starts looking through it. But as she scans the prices, she quietly thinks to herself that everything here is way too expensive. Chen Yang tells the waiter to bring one of each of the 3 signature dishes and also 2 Dungeness crabs. The waiter nods and says all right and asks them to wait a moment. After the waiter leaves, Su-yen immediately leans toward Chen-yong and asks why he ordered such expensive food. She points out that 2 Dungeness crabs alone cost around 1,000 yuan. Chen-yong casually tells her not to worry and says he's very flush with cash right now, so he can definitely afford 2 crabs. Su-yen rolls her eyes and tells him to stop pretending to be rich when she knows he usually buys the cheapest mystery box meals online. Chen-yong coughs awkwardly and then explains that his childhood home was recently demolished. Hearing that, Su-yen suddenly brightens up and says that now she understands. She jokes that, in that case, she has no psychological burden about eating the expensive meal. She laughs and says this is basically robbing the rich to feed the poor. Chen-yong just coughs again, slightly speechless. Later, after finishing the meal, Chen-yong asks if she wants to go somewhere else for a second round. Su-yen pats her stomach and says the food was delicious, but she really can't eat anymore. Just then, a man suddenly appears nearby and calls out Chen-yang's name, asking why he's here. Turns out to be Zhang Jinglong. Chen-yong looks at him and says what a coincidence. He comments that Daijing is such a big city, yet he still ran into him just by coming out for a meal. Zhang Jinglong sneers and asks if Chen-yong really thinks he's worthy of eating at a 5-star hotel. Chen-yong calmly responds by asking whether Jingling Diao belongs to Zhang's family and whether he's planning to kick him out. Zhang then says it seems Chen-yong already knows how he got fired. Su-yen, confused, quietly asks Chen-yong if this person is his friend. Meanwhile, Zhang Jinglong glances at Su-yen and is immediately stunned by how beautiful she is. In his mind, he thinks that she's incredibly hot. He then starts scheming to himself. He thinks that Chen-yong must have brought her here to pick up girls, so he decides he'll expose Chen-yong as a poor loser and, if possible, steal the girl away as well. Zhang Jinglong turns to Su-yen and tells her not to be deceived by Chen-yong. He says he's Chen-yang's college classmate and knows him inside out. According to him, Chen-yong is extremely poor, recently got fired, and can barely afford rent. He continues by saying that bringing her to a place like this probably cost Chen-yong a fortune just to pretend to be a big shot. Zhang claims that Chen-yong is the type who first blinds girls with false appearances and then tricks them until they lose both their body and their wealth. Hearing all these insulting accusations, Chen-yong immediately gets angry and asks if Zhang really thinks everyone is as low as he is. Su-yen calmly says that she understands and thanks him for the reminder. Zhang proudly introduces himself as Zhang Jinglong and says he hates seeing beautiful women get scammed. Then he adds that his company is currently looking for an image spokesperson and asks if she would be interested. He even takes out a business card and offers it to her. Su-yen simply swats the card away and says that's a pity, but she's not interested. Zhang tries again and says the benefits and treatment for their spokesperson are very good and asks her to think about it one more time. Su-yen firmly says there's no need. She explains that she is Chen-yang's girlfriend and doesn't like hearing someone badmouth her boyfriend. She then adds that with a director like Zhang, the company will probably go bankrupt sooner or later. Zhang is instantly furious and shouts at her. Meanwhile, Chen-yong quietly gives Su-yen a thumbs up and says she really knows how to put on a show. Su-yen smiles and says she is an actress after all. Then she grabs Chen-yong and tells him they should go and not waste time on trash. The two of them start walking away together. Behind them, Zhang Jinglong is furious. He curses and asks if she's blind for falling for someone like Chen-yong. Then he angrily tells Chen-yong to just wait and see what happens. At that moment, another woman walks up behind him and asks if he can take her home now. It's Chen-yang's ex-girlfriend, Peng Jia. Zhang quickly changes his tone and tells Jia not to rush. He says he already booked a table at a bar and suggests they go have a couple more drinks. But Peng Jia calmly refuses and says there's no need because she's not interested. Zhang looks surprised. Peng Jia then tells him she'll transfer the money for tonight's meal to him. She walks toward the car while Zhang calls after her, repeatedly shouting Jia's name, but she doesn't respond. She simply gets into the car and leaves. Meanwhile, Zhang Jinglong stands there watching Peng Jia leave. Frustrated, he mutters angrily that every single one of them dares to put on airs in front of him. Not far away, Chen-yong and Su-yen are walking together. Su-yen comments that the guy they just met was really annoying. Chen-yong says that although Zhang Jinglong was annoying, running into him actually helped him realize something. Su-yen asks what he means. Chen-yong explains that after suddenly getting a lot of money, he had been wondering what kind of career he should pursue. But now he has made up his mind. He says he's going to open a game company and completely defeat Zhang Jinglong. Su-yen warns him that opening a company is very risky. She tells him he should think things through carefully and not act on impulse. Chen-yong confidently tells her not to worry and says she should just wait and watch the show. Later that night, back back at Chun Yang's residential compound, he's taking a shower. While bathing, he starts thinking seriously about his situation. He realizes that exchanging goods in the wasteland for gold might work for now, but as his assets grow, it will eventually attract attention or even investigations. Because of that, if he wants to legalize his income, he needs to establish a proper career in this world as well. After finishing his shower, he walks out, pulls a chair in front of his computer, and starts thinking while using it. He concludes that besides its abundant resources, the wasteland's biggest advantage is its technology. According to Li Lu, it has only been about 10 years since the Great Cataclysm there, so the technological inheritance shouldn't be completely lost yet. If he searches carefully, he believes he can definitely find many experts from different fields. Then another idea comes to him. Based on the monthly standards in the apocalypse, he can hire these experts for just 15 packs of spicy strips. With technology that's roughly 200 years ahead of the present, he realizes that creating a cross-era game would be incredibly easy. Back in his building, Chun Yong is on the phone saying that the registration request has been submitted and that he will be contacted by SMS once the approval is complete. He thanks the person on the call and hangs up. After that, he thinks to himself that the company registration has been left to the agent. The next thing he needs to deal with is hiring employees. But before that, he decides he should hurry and buy some food and head to the wasteland again. While thinking about it, he realizes something important. Since that place is actually the world 200 years in the future, it's probably not a good idea to bring snacks again. If someone with sharp eyes notices the production dates, it could create unnecessary trouble. Later, he goes shopping and walks up to a store counter. The receptionist greets him and asks if he wants to buy something. Chun Yong casually says he wants to buy 50 caddies of pork. Hearing that, the receptionist is shocked and repeats the number in disbelief. About half an hour later, Chun Yong is pushing a cart filled with supplies. Looking at it, he happily says he'll take all of it. He also adds 20 caddies of potatoes, 20 caddies of corn, and 20 caddies of Chinese cabbage. Later, back at his home, Chun Yong struggles to carry the large packages inside. As he sets them down, he shouts heave-ho while catching his breath. He then thinks that even though the physique enhancement made this kind of weight feel like nothing, constantly moving things back and forth like this is still very troublesome. He realizes that it's manageable right now since he only has a few supplies, but once the company is established later, how will he move enough food to feed dozens or even hundreds of people? Just as he's thinking about this problem, the ring on his finger suddenly begins to glow. In the next moment, the entire package in front of him disappears. Chun Yong stares in shock and wonders what just happened. Then a thought suddenly comes to him. He checks the ring and realizes that the package is now inside it. Curious, he says the word, summon, and the package instantly reappears in front of him. When he retrieves it again, the package returns back into the ring. Chun Yong immediately becomes excited and realizes that it's actually a storage space. He laughs happily and says the ring not only lets him travel to the wasteland world, but also has other amazing abilities. Overjoyed, he even kisses the ring and calls it really lovely. He jokes that it's like someone delivering a pillow just when he's sleepy and says the ring service is simply incredible. Then, filled with excitement, he declares that it's time to go to the apocalypse again and activates the ring to travel back to the wasteland world. After arriving in the wasteland again, Chun Yong takes the package out of the ring and thinks to himself that he can't reveal his abilities in front of others yet. To avoid arousing suspicion, he decides it's better to carry the supplies normally when he goes to find Li Lu. So he picks up the package and heads to meet her. Meanwhile, Li Lu is sitting alone with the remaining snack from earlier. She takes a small piece and puts it in her mouth. The moment she tastes it, she feels like she's in heaven again and says she really wants to eat another pack. But then she quickly stops herself. She reminds herself that well-sealed food that doesn't rot is a precious resource in the wasteland. If she saves it carefully, one pack could help her survive for more than a week in this desperate environment. Then a sudden thought hits her. She realizes that Chun Yong exchanged precious food for a pile of useless gold yesterday. She starts worrying that Chun Yong might get blamed or punished by his organization for doing that. She tries to comfort herself by thinking that an organization with such abundant food supplies probably wouldn't lack members. For someone like Chun Yong to casually trade food like that, his position must be quite high. Still, she imagines him being punished by the organization and shouting for another chance, which makes her feel uneasy. In the end, she sighs and tells herself that he probably won't come back anyway. Maybe everything that happened yesterday was just a beautiful dream. Just then, the door suddenly opens. Chun Yong walks in carrying a huge package and casually tells her to come help move the stuff. The moment Li Lu sees him, she jumps up in excitement and shouts, "Boss!" She rushes forward and throws herself at him, causing the things he's carrying to scatter all over the ground. Overjoyed, destroyed. Li Lu says she can't believe he really came back and that it's great to see him again. She even starts tearing up and admits that she thought he was lying to her yesterday. Chun Yang looks confused and asks why he would lie to her. Li Lu explains that yesterday she only brought him a bag of useless gold, and the value of a Tier 1 enhancement serum simply can't compare to a backpack full of food. She believed his organization would definitely punish him for it. Chun Yang calmly tells her not to worry. He says his status in the organization is very high, so a mere bag of food means nothing to them. He also explains that he exchanged for gold because it's useful to him, so he didn't actually lose anything. Li Lu nods as she finally understands. Chun Yang then tells her that if she understands, she should hurry up and pick up the things scattered on the ground. As Li Lu starts gathering the supplies, she suddenly picks up a huge watermelon. Her eyes widen in shock. Staring at it, she exclaims that these are real vegetables and asks in disbelief if his organization actually grows its own vegetables. Chun Yang looks at the vegetable and casually says it's just a Chinese cabbage and asks if it's really worth reacting like that. Li Lu immediately explains that after the Great Cataclysm, the soil became completely polluted. Because of that, vegetables simply can't survive if people try to plant them. Chun Yang waves his hand and tells her to stop crying. He casually says that if she likes them, he'll just give all the vegetables to her since it's no big deal. Hearing that, Li Lu is shocked again. She repeats his words in disbelief and asks if he really means giving them to her. Holding the cabbage carefully, she says the vegetables are far too precious. She explains that she can't even judge their real value, so she cannot accept them. She continues by saying that Chen Yang is a good person for being willing to give her such precious food. But since she works for him, she will only accept the salary she deserves. Hearing that, Chun Yang silently thinks that he just got hit with a good person card. He then tells her that he has already thought about a better salary system for her. Compared to spicy strips, real food that can actually fill her stomach would be much more suitable. He also tells her that if she needs anything else in the future, she can mention it to him. However, in return, her service quality must keep up. Li Lu immediately says she will do her utmost to satisfy him. Chun Yang then clarifies that their current relationship is that of employer and employee. Her role is to act as his personal secretary and answer his questions whenever he needs information. Li Lu quickly says she understands. Chun Yang then explains that he brought meat and vegetables this time because he wants her help hiring more people. Li Lu looks surprised and asks if he wants to recruit more workers. She also asks if he has any requirements. Chun Yang says the first requirement is high loyalty. After that, it would be best if they have some kind of special ability. Li Lu thinks for a moment and suggests that they go to nearby Grey Rat Town. She explains that around 10,000 survivors live there, and no matter what kind of special skills they are looking for, they can probably find someone there. Chun Yang remembers something and asks about the relationship between Grey Rat District D and Grey Rat Town, since earlier she mentioned that their settlement was called Grey Rat District D. Li Lu explains that Grey Rat Town is the central hub. Around it, there are 12 small settlements. These settlements are named with letters, starting from Grey Rat District A and going all the way to District L. She adds that these 12 settlements rely on Grey Rat Town to survive. Whenever they need to exchange for scarce supplies, they go there. Chun Yang then asks an unusual question. He asks if there are many programmers there who understand computer programming, preferably the kind who can make games. When Li Lu hears the word computer, she looks quite surprised. Li Lu looks confused and says she doesn't understand what he means. She asks if he's talking about that primitive product from ancient times. Chun Yang awkwardly responds that it does sound a bit ancient now. Then he asks if it would be difficult to find someone who knows that kind of technology. Li Lu says she isn't sure either. She explains that even before the Great Cataclysm, people had already started using Intel brains instead of traditional computers. Then she suddenly remembers something. She tells him that there is a pre-cataclysm technical director in their camp who knows Intel brain technology very well. Excited, she grabs Chun Yang's hand and tells him to hurry, so she can take him to ask that person. Chun Yang quickly tells her he can walk on his own. Later, while the two of them are walking together, Chun Yang asks something he had been curious about for a while. He wonders why nobody in the settlement locks their doors. Li Lu explains that everyone here is poor as church mice, so there's nothing valuable worth stealing. She also says that survival in the wasteland depends heavily on unity. Anyone who steals or destroys that unity will be expelled from all the settlements once discovered. After walking a little farther, Li Lu says they've arrived and that the person they're looking for is inside. Just then they hear a strange voice from inside chanting happily about meat and how delicious it is. Suddenly, there's a loud explosion. Chun Yang reacts with disgust. Li Lu calmly calls out to Uncle Wei and says she needs to see him about something. A moment later, Uncle Wei comes out. He greets Li Lu and tells her she's lucky today because he just caught a fat one. He proudly introduces himself as a scientist. Then he says that once he finishes processing it, he'll share the 2 hind legs with her. Li Lu immediately gets excited and happily agrees. Chen Yang, however, is completely confused and asks what exactly they're talking about. When he takes a closer look, he realizes it's a giant gray rat and asks if it's some kind of mutated creature. Li Lu confirms that it is. She explains that besides zombies, this type of rat is the most common mutated creature in the wasteland. Adult ones can grow to about half a meter long, and they're also one of the main sources of meat for people here. After explaining that, Li Lu turns to Uncle Wei and says she actually came to introduce a job opportunity. She points to Chen Yang and says he's her current boss. She explains that he wants to hire some people and that the remuneration is very generous. Uncle Wei walks closer and looks Chen Yang up and down. Then he skeptically asks what kind of generous pay a young kid like him could possibly offer. He even wonders if Chen Yang might actually be a scammer. Chen Yang stretches out his hand and calmly says that he needs technical talent in the cerebral field. He explains that as long as someone can meet his requirements, the monthly pay will be 30 caddies of rice and flour plus 10 caddies of raw meat. Hearing this, Uncle Wei is stunned and asks if he really means rice and flour. Chen Yang confidently says of course he does. He even adds that if Uncle Wei is worried, he can advance the salary first. The scientist looks shocked and asks if he's serious. Li Lu quickly reassures him and says not to worry. She explains that as long as the boss nods, she can immediately give him the meat. Uncle Wei suddenly bursts into laughter and says that in that case, Mr. Chun has found the right person. He proudly claims that he is absolutely the person who understands Intel brains the best in District D. But Chen Yang shakes his head and says he misunderstood. What he wants to do actually has nothing to do with Intel brains. He then explains that he's talking about computers, the kind of personal computers people used in ancient times. What he really needs is someone who understands that kind of primitive technology. Hearing that, the scientist pauses in confusion and repeats the word computers. Uncle Wei scratches his head and says he has certainly heard of computers before, but in his opinion they are extremely primitive. He complains that their functions are limited and the interaction experience is terrible, so they basically have no value. Chen Yang cuts him off and says he only needs someone who understands the technology. He tells him to just answer whether he can do it or not. Uncle Wei immediately starts thinking to himself that he cannot give up the chance to get rice, flour, and raw meat every month. So he quickly changes his attitude and asks what specific kind of technology Chen Yang needs. Chen Yang explains that it's very simple. All he needs is someone who can use a computer to program and create software according to his requirements. Uncle Wei cautiously asks if that means he would have to handcraft 0.4 nanometer chips. Chen Yang immediately says there's no need for that. Uncle Wei then asks if he needs to design any super AI core algorithms. Chen Yang again says there's no need. Hearing that, Uncle Wei suddenly relaxes and confidently says there's absolutely no problem. He promises that as long as the hardware conditions allow it, he can complete all the programming requirements. However, he also points out that software created on computers cannot directly run on Intel brains. Because of that, he asks what Chen Yang plans to use it for. Chen Yang calmly tells him that he doesn't need to worry about that. He says a truly good employee simply completes the task perfectly without asking unnecessary questions. Uncle Wei quickly nods and says he understands completely. Chen Yang then says that's good. He tells him that he will solve the hardware problem himself. He also asks if Uncle Wei has any other requirements, adding that he definitely won't be lacking food. Uncle Wei thinks for a moment and says it would be best if he could also get an Intel brain to assist with the work. He explains that he could develop complex code on the Intel brain first and then transplant it to the computer, which would make the process much faster. He adds that even a low-spec model would be enough. Chen Yang nods and says he understands and will figure out a way. Li Lu then says they should get going. Uncle Wei waves goodbye and politely says goodbye to the boss. Later, outside, Chen Yang asks Li Lu whether Intel brains are easy to obtain. Li Lu explains that there aren't any in District D, but they can be bought in Grey Rat Town. The only problem is that they're a bit expensive. Chen Yang looks worried and asks if the food he brought today might not be enough to buy one. He wonders if Intel brains are really that expensive. Li Lu quickly shakes her head and says that they are expensive for people like them. But for Chen Yang, even buying 100 of them would be more than enough. Chen Yang asks if enhancement serums can also be bought in Grey Rat Town. Li Lu immediately replies that they can, but only Tier 1 and Tier 2 serums are available there. If someone wants higher tier serums, they need to go to the Doctors Association distribution point in the eastern region. Hearing that name, Chunyang asks what the Doctors Association is. Li Lu explains that it's one of the top factions in the wasteland. All enhancement serums and healing potions are developed by them. She looks a little surprised and asks if he really didn't know that. Chunyang quickly says that the organization he belongs to has always been self-sufficient, so he basically knows nothing about the outside world. Then he adds that since she's going to Grey Rat Town anyway, he also wants her to go to the Doctors Association and buy a batch of enhancement serums. Li Lu immediately agrees and says there's no problem. Chunyang tells her that he'll return to his own world first to get a computer for Uncle Wei. The rest of the work will be left to her. Li Lu nods and says she understands. Before leaving, Chunyang gives her one more instruction. He tells her that if she encounters danger during trading, she should abandon the food if necessary and prioritize her own safety. Li Lu falls silent for a moment before quietly saying that she understands. Later, as the sun sets, Chunyang returns to his room in the present world. Thinking about the deal he just made, he says that paying 30 caddies of rice and flour plus 10 caddies of raw meat is basically hiring a technical director for less than 400 yuan a month. To him, the wasteland really feels like a gold mine of opportunities. He stretches and jokingly says that ordinary people like him are truly living happily now. Just then, he notices Zhou Dandan lying nearby, scrolling on her phone while thinking about what she should order on Pinduoduo for dinner. Seeing her relaxed pose makes Chunyang feel a little awkward, though he secretly finds it amusing. Suddenly, Dan notices him and becomes flustered. She quickly sits up and tells him to stop staring. Confused, she asks why he's at home because she looked in his bedroom earlier and there was clearly no one there. Chunyang casually says he's been home the whole time and suggests she might have remembered wrong. Then he says he has something to do and needs to go out, but promises to treat her to dinner tonight. With that, he quickly rushes out the door. After he leaves, Dan sighs and mutters to herself that men are all big pig trotters. Later outside, Chunyang remembers that Su Yen failed her audition earlier. He recalls that she sometimes works part-time at Computer City, so he decides to go there and buy a computer from her. When he arrives, he sees Su Yen working at the reception desk. At that moment, a man walks up to her and starts talking in a suggestive tone. He asks if she has reconsidered his proposal and says that as long as she agrees, he'll pick up the goods tomorrow. Su Yen immediately shuts him down. She calmly tells him that they sell computers there and do not provide the kind of service he's implying. Chunyang gestures and calls out to the sales associate, asking if she can come over for a second because he has some questions. Su Yen quickly walks over and whispers that thank goodness he showed up because she was about to be annoyed to death by that damn fatty. Chunyang asks if the guy was bargaining too aggressively. Su Yen says not at all. She explains that he's building a Buyuan computer but keeps insisting that she go drink with him tonight. She then asks Chunyang if she really looks like the kind of person who would agree to something like that. Then she asks what he actually came for and jokes that he didn't come just to watch her make a fool of herself. Chunyang says he came to build a computer, of course. He reminds her that he told her earlier he was starting a game company. He then asks her to help him assemble a top-spec desktop computer. He specifically tells her to install the newest and most expensive graphics card and all the best components. Su Yen is surprised and says the highest spec computer in the shop costs around 100,000 yuan. She reminds him that he's opening a company, not just playing games himself, and asks why he needs something that expensive. Chunyang explains that he needs a high-spec machine to test the software's load limits. Su Yen nods and tells him to wait there for a moment while she goes to get the equipment. While she goes inside, the fat man who was bothering her earlier walks over again. He mutters to himself that he must get that girl today. Then he asks Chunyang what he's planning to buy and what his budget is. Chunyang simply points to a computer labeled 100,000 yuan and says that's the one they're buying. The fat man is completely stunned and asks if he's serious about buying the top-spec machine. Just then Su Yen comes back carrying the packaged computer and says his order is ready. She tells him the total is 130,000 yuan and asks how he would like to pay. Seeing the transaction actually happening, the fat man is completely shocked and asks if this is really real. Chunyang then looks at him and jokingly asks if he still wants him to go drink with him. The fat man immediately backs off and runs away, saying there's no way. Meanwhile, back in Grey Rat Town, Li Lu is walking through the streets with a large backpack. Some people nearby begin watching her. One man approaches her and asks if she wants to hang out and have some fun together. Li Lu bluntly says she's not interested, but the man keeps moving closer and whispers to his companions that her backpack looks very full, which probably means she's carrying something valuable. Li Lu Lu immediately tells him to get lost. She pulls out her gun slightly and warns him that if he doesn't back off, she won't hesitate to get rough. The man who approached Lu backs off when he sees the gun, but one of the others mutters in surprise that she's actually carrying a weapon. Lu continues walking forward while keeping her composure. Inside, she keeps reminding herself to stay calm. She knows she absolutely cannot show even the slightest weakness, because if she does, that pack of hyenas will rush at her immediately and tear her apart. After a while, she arrives at a wasteland repair shop. She walks up to the counter and says she wants to buy an Intel brain. The man at the counter tells her that the basic model costs 15 kilograms of gray rat meat, and if she wants an additional plug-in module, that will cost another 5 kilograms. Lu calmly says she will just take the basic model. The man checks the goods she brought and says the weight is sufficient. He hands her the Intel brain and places it into her bag. Before she leaves, he asks if she wants to trade for anything else, saying he has plenty of treasures available. Lu simply says there's no need. After she walks away, one of the men nearby asks if they should follow her. Another one shakes his head and says it's not worth the trouble. As Lu keeps moving through the streets, she quietly lets out a sigh of relief. In her mind, she thinks that was close. She nearly got exposed earlier. If those people had seen the cabbage she's carrying, the entire settlement would have gone crazy. After traveling a bit farther, she finally reaches another location. Standing at the entrance, she says she has finally arrived. A person inside greets her and tells her to look around for whatever she wants. Inside the shop, many different serums are displayed. There are Mangu serums, Steel serums, Bull serums, Tier 1 enhancement serums, Tier 2 enhancement serums, and even Tier 3 enhancement serums. But after looking at all of them, Lu calmly says that these are still too basic. She says she wants higher grade serums. The shopkeeper laughs and tells her that the price of high grade serums isn't something a little girl like her can afford. Without saying another word, Lu slowly takes out the cabbage and shows it to him. The moment the man sees it, his eyes widen in shock as he realizes what it is. The man suddenly rushes past Lu, moving so fast that even she is surprised. She immediately turns around and says he's incredibly fast. Instinctively, she pulls out her weapon and points it at him, demanding to know what he's doing. The man calmly tells her not to worry because he has no ill intentions. He adds that if he really wanted to rob her, that broken gun of hers wouldn't stand a chance against a Tier 9 enhanced human. Lu is stunned and asks if he just said Tier 9 enhancement. She says she can't believe it and asks why the Doctors Association would assign a Tier 9 distributor to a remote place like Grey Rat Town. The man shrugs and replies that in the wasteland, nothing is impossible. Then he politely asks if he can take a closer look at the cabbage. Lu hesitates for a moment but eventually hands it over. The moment the man holds it, he becomes almost frantic with excitement. He carefully examines it and says the freshness and color are unbelievable. He realizes it's a completely fresh Chinese cabbage that hasn't been contaminated by radiation at all. He calls it a miracle and says it's like seeing a miracle with his own eyes. Lu then tells him that if he wants it, he should exchange it for serums of equal value. The man immediately warns her not to try asking for an outrageous price just because of the opportunity. Lu calmly replies that the soil in the wasteland can't grow vegetables anymore, so he should understand the value of something like this. The man nods and says he does understand that its value comes from its rarity. However, he also says he doesn't want his trading partner to be an opportunistic villain. Lu reassures him that she has enough sincerity to complete the deal fairly. Hearing that, the man agrees and presses a button. A hidden compartment opens, revealing several items. He says he will also show his sincerity. He presents a complete set of enhancement serums from Tier 1 to Tier 6, along with a healing potion capable of curing diseases caused by cellular mutation. Then he points to the main attraction, a brand new carbon fiber bio-warmer armor. Lu looks shocked and asks if all of those items are hers. The man immediately says of course not. He tells her she can only choose 2 items, and he tosses them in front of her. Confused, Lu asks why he bothered introducing the armor if she can't take it. The man smiles and says it's naturally for their second transaction. He presses the button again and the display disappears. Then he tells her that if she wants that armor, she'll have to bring more Chinese cabbage or other vegetables next time. Hearing that, Lu suddenly becomes suspicious and wonders how he knew she had access to other vegetables. The man explains that the Chinese cabbage is so perfect that it clearly isn't some accidental product. In his opinion, a faction that has mastered vegetable planting technology wouldn't just grow a single cabbage. Li Lu quickly replies that it wasn't grown at all. She claims she simply found it by chance in a ruin that existed before the Great Cataclysm. The man smiles and says that even if such a ruin really exists, it wouldn't preserve only one cabbage. He tells her to hurry back and discuss it with her companions. He adds that for people living in the wasteland, vegetables are surely less useful than a powerful suit of armor. Li Lu thinks for a moment and finally agrees. She tells him to keep the armor safe because she will return as soon as possible. After she leaves, the man mutters to himself that although he was exiled to this godforsaken place because he lost a power struggle, it might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise if he can obtain such precious vegetables. Meanwhile, back in the modern world, Chun Yang is standing near a truck in front of a supermarket. One of the workers unloading the cargo tells Mr. Chun that his goods have arrived and asks where they should unload everything. Chun Yang casually tells them to place it in the nearby storage area. As the workers carry the boxes, one of them quietly comments that the meat alone is worth more than 20,000 yuan and wonders why someone would buy so much at once. The other worker tells him it's none of his business and that he should just focus on doing his job. After finishing the delivery, the worker tells Chun Yang that if he needs anything else, he can contact them anytime. Then they drive away in the truck. Chun Yang looks around the empty alley and says he's lucky that there's usually no one there and no surveillance cameras. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know where to store such a large amount of goods. Once he's sure the coast is clear, he activates his ring and stores everything inside it in one go. But then he starts thinking more seriously about the situation. He realizes this method isn't a long-term solution. With such huge quantities of supplies, sooner or later someone will run into him while he's doing this. He even jokes to himself that if he somehow ends up trending online again, he'll be completely exposed, down to the last detail. After thinking it over carefully, Chun Yang decides that as a temporary solution it would be better to rent a private factory building. He also considers finding a food factory to cooperate with. That way, not only would he have a proper place to store supplies, but he could also greatly increase the variety of food he brings to the wasteland. Chun Yang thinks to himself that just as he expected, the storage space inside the ring is in a state of absolute stasis. No matter how much fresh food he stores inside, he doesn't have to worry about it spoiling. To test it out, he takes out a nice ice cream and eats it. While he's enjoying it, he suddenly receives a phone call. The voice on the other end informs him that the registration process for Chun Yang Technology Company Limited has been completed. Chun Yang calmly replies that he understands. After hanging up, he smiles and says that from now on, his career has officially begun. Later, when he returns home, he announces that he's back. Dan immediately asks where he went earlier since he left in such a hurry. She jokingly asks if he went out for a job interview. Chun Yang tells her he forgot to mention something earlier. He explains that he opened a company himself, so he doesn't need to look for a job anymore. Dan looks at him suspiciously and says he doesn't think she's as easy to fool as a 3-year-old. Does he? Chun Yang insists he's not lying and repeats that his hometown recently got demolished. Hearing that, Dan suddenly understands. She says that explains why he was suddenly generous enough to treat them to dinner at that expensive restaurant the night before. She jokes that he must have been showered with demolition money. She sighs and says he's really lucky. Her family lives in a small county town, so even if their place were demolished, they wouldn't get much money. Then she notices something strange and asks why he's covering his nose. Chun Yang casually changes the topic and asks how much her salary is now. Dan replies that her take-home pay is only a little over 5,000 yuan a month. She jokes that if the company didn't provide meals, she would have starved to death on the streets a long time ago. She dramatically collapses onto the couch and sighs, wondering when the heavens will finally open their eyes and let people like them experience the feeling of getting rich overnight. Chun Yang laughs and says getting rich overnight might be impossible. But then he offers her something else. He asks if she wants to consider joining his company. He says he can give her triple her current salary, 15,000 yuan a month. Dan immediately starts calculating in her head. She realizes that if she saves carefully, she could save nearly 100,000 yuan in a year. Excited by the thought, she imagines being able to eat hot pot whenever she wants and buy new bags whenever she feels like it. Chun Yang smiles and asks if that means she agrees. Dan says she hasn't agreed yet. She explains that what if his company goes bankrupt in just a few days. She tells him to explain the company's situation first, and she'll make a decision after judging it. As she speaks, She even takes out a pen and starts writing notes. Chun-young explains that the company was just registered today with a capital of 1 million yuan. He adds that the company will mainly focus on PC and mobile games. Dan nods while writing, but then says the company sounds pretty unreliable so far. She points out that aside from having money, it doesn't seem to have anything else yet. She asks whether a game company shouldn't have a development roadmap and a technical team. Chun-young confidently tells her not to worry, because that is exactly where their company's greatest competitive advantage lies. Dan continues thinking like a professional and says that the most important task right now is to find a suitable office building. She also says they'll need to arrange licenses and various applications. Just as she finishes talking, she grabs her bag and prepares to head out. Chun-young asks where she's going. Dan casually replies that she's obviously going to resign. Hearing that, Chun-young feels a little emotional. In his mind, he realizes she's actually supporting him with her actions. A moment later, Chun-yang's phone suddenly rings. He answers it, listens for a moment, and then says he understands and that he'll leave immediately. Dan notices his expression turning pale and asks if something happened. Chun-young explains that his grandfather has always had poor health, and recently he was diagnosed with a serious illness. The doctor said he might only have about a month left to live, so Chun-young has to return home to see him one last time. Chun-young thanks Dan sincerely. Dan tells him there's no need to be so formal since they're roommates. She urges him to hurry back home. Chun-young quickly starts packing his things, determined to leave as soon as possible. As he heads out, he thinks to himself that he absolutely cannot let his grandfather leave like that. He remembers the enhancement serums from the apocalypse world and realizes there might be a way to save him. With that thought firmly in his mind, he walks out the door, determined to find a solution. At the Dahang Bullet train station, the place is packed with people. Chun-young is there as well, waiting among the crowd. Suddenly a woman spots him and calls out his name, asking if he is Chun-young. Chun-young turns around, recognizes her, and asks if she is Zhu Run. Zhu Run smiles and says it really is him. She says she didn't expect to run into an old classmate there. Thinking about it, she mentions that they haven't seen each other for 7 years. Then she asks if he's heading back to Wangai City. Chun-young says yes. At that moment, a station announcement plays, informing passengers that ticket checking for their train is about to begin. Chun-young suggests that they walk and talk. Zhu Run agrees. As they head toward the gate, Zhu Run asks where his seat is. She says she might try switching seats with the person next to him so they can sit together. Chun-young checks his ticket and explains that because he bought the ticket in a hurry, only business class seats were left. Zhu Run says that in that case they can just talk after arriving in Wangai. But Chun-young tells her there's no need because he has another idea. Zhu Run looks confused and asks what he means. Chun-young asks her to wait for a moment and walks over to a nearby staff member. He politely asks if there are any empty seats in business class. The staff member checks and says yes. She explains that out of the 4 business class seats in his row, only his ticket has been sold. Chun-young asks her to change Zhu Run's ticket to the seat next to his and says he will cover the cost. Zhu Run is stunned when she hears this and can only say wow. The staff member processes the change and hands Zhu Run the new ticket, asking her to keep it safe. Overjoyed, Zhu Run immediately runs over and hugs Chun-young, thanking him excitedly. Chun-young gets a little flustered by the sudden hug. Zhu Run notices and asks what's wrong. Chun-young awkwardly says it's nothing and tells her she's welcome. Later, inside the train, Zhu Run looks around curiously and says it's her first time sitting in business class. She comments that it really is much more spacious than the regular carriages. Then she asks Chun-young something she's been wondering about. She remembers that he was already working in Dahang and asks why he suddenly decided to go back to Wangai. Chun-young explains that his grandfather is sick. Zhu Run gently places a hand on his shoulder and tells him not to worry too much. She says that medical science is very advanced now, so his grandfather will surely be cured. Chun-young nods. Then he asks why she came to Dahang. Zhu Run explains that she came to promote her father's factory and drum up business. Chun-young remembers something and says he recalls that her father runs a food factory. Zhu Run says that's right. Her father does run a food factory. But unfortunately, in the past 2 years things have been really difficult. Most people now only trust big brands when buying food products, so small factories like theirs are struggling. She explains that the business has been constantly losing money and they can barely afford to pay the workers' wages. Hearing this, Chun-Yang secretly thinks this might actually be perfect. He had already been looking for a food supplier for long-term cooperation. Not only could this help an old classmate, but it would also allow him to steadily strengthen his wasteland team. So he tells Zhu Run that he might actually be able to help her. She looks surprised and asks how he could help. Chun-Yang explains that he just happens to be looking for a food factory to partner with and sign a long-term supply contract. Zhu Run is shocked and asks if he's serious. Chun-Yang says of course he is, but he will need to visit the factory and inspect it first. Zhu Run says that's no problem, but she's still curious. She reminds him that they both just graduated from university not long ago, so she wonders why he suddenly has such a large order demand. Chun-Yang casually explains that he recently started his own company and that his business partners happen to need food supplies. Zhu Run immediately suggests that they exchange contact information. Chun-Yang agrees without hesitation. After they add each other, they later get into a taxi together. Chun-Yang says he needs to visit his grandfather first, so the factory inspection will probably have to wait a couple of days. Zhu Run says that's fine. When the taxi stops, Chun-Yang gets out and leaves. Zhu Run waves and says goodbye. In her mind, she thinks it's surprising that she ran into Chun-Yang after so many years and that he even offered to help her. She wonders if this reunion might be fate. Just then, another car pulls up and a man calls her name, telling her to come over. Zhu Run replies that she's coming. The man is her father. After she gets into the car, her father asks how the partnership talks went this time. Zhu Run says there is one piece of bad news and one piece of good news. Her father asks about the bad news first. She explains that she didn't manage to find any business partners in Dahang. Her father sighs and then asks what the good news is. Zhu Run says the good news is that she ran into an old classmate named Chun-Yang on the train. She explains that he happens to have a large order and plans to visit their factory for an inspection in a few days. However, her father immediately becomes cautious. He says that when it comes to an old classmate suddenly offering big business, it might just be a scam, and she needs to be careful. At Wang'ai City People's Hospital, Chun-Yang arrives and someone greets him. His father walks out and says Xiaoyang is finally back. Chun-Yang immediately asks how his grandfather's condition is. His father says that the old man just took his medicine and fell asleep. He tells Chun-Yang to go rest for a while and says he'll call him when his grandfather wakes up. Chun-Yang nods and says he understands. After that, he walks into the bathroom. Standing there alone, he clenches his fists and thinks that he must hurry. No matter what, he has to find medicine that can cure his grandfather. Without wasting any time, he activates the ring and travels to the wasteland world. He appears again in Grey Rat District D. Looking around, he wonders what he should do if Li Lu isn't there. He briefly considers going to Uncle Wei instead but hesitates, wondering if he can fully trust him. In the end, he decides to go straight to Li Lu's house. He calls out her name and asks if she's there. As he pushes the door open and starts walking inside, he suddenly sees something unexpected. Shocked, he immediately steps back out and stammers awkwardly that he'll come back later to talk. After a while, the two meet again. Li Lu asks what the boss is looking for in such a hurry. Chun-Yang quickly asks her an important question. He wants to know whether, with the current medical technology in their world, even terminal cancer is no longer considered an incurable disease. Li Lu says of course it isn't. She explains that during the Great Cataclysm, the Earth became filled with radiation, and cancer became even more common than catching a cold. If it couldn't be cured, humanity would have gone extinct a long time ago. Chun-Yang then asks about the cure rate. Li Lu thinks for a moment and says that about 100 years ago, the cure rate of the specific medicine was already around 95%. But after the apocalypse began, nobody really had the time to keep statistics anymore. Hearing this, Chun-Yang feels relieved and says it's a good thing his guess was correct. Then he asks whether this specific medicine can be purchased in Grey Rat Town. Li Lu shakes her head and says not really. Chun-Yang's expression immediately becomes disappointed. But Li Lu quickly adds that the cellular disease serum produced by the Doctors Association also has the effect of treating cancer. The moment Chun-Yang hears that, he becomes determined again and tells her to take him to the Doctors Association immediately. Li Lu quickly tells him to wait a moment. Chun-Yang impatiently asks what they're waiting for because he needs to get that serum as soon as possible. Li Lu suddenly takes out a serum and hands it to him, saying she already exchanged for one. Chun-Yang's face lights up with excitement. He asks where it came from and wonders if she went to the Doctors Association. Li Lu nods and says yes. She explains that since the boss told her earlier that she needed to increase her strength as quickly as possible, she went to the Doctors Association and made a trade using a cabbage. Chunyang is stunned and asks if she really exchanged just one cabbage for that serum. Li Lu quickly shakes her head and says no, that serum was only a bonus. Then she tells him to follow her. She opens a bag and reveals a large collection of items inside. Li Lu proudly says that this is everything she got, a full set of Tier 1 to Tier 6 enhancement serums. Chunyang repeats the words Tier 1 to Tier 6 enhancement serums in disbelief. However, the way he reacts makes Li Lu nervous. She thinks that the boss must be unhappy because she didn't exchange enough. After all, vegetables like cabbage are incredibly precious in the wasteland. But instead of being angry, Chunyang suddenly starts happily juggling the serums in excitement. In his mind, he can hardly believe it. To him, this deal was basically done at the price of a single cabbage. He even thinks the Doctors Association must have acted like they had never seen vegetables before. Laughing to himself, he realizes he has now achieved what he calls serum freedom. Li Lu watches him quietly and asks why he hasn't said anything. She worries that maybe he thinks she made a bad trade. Chunyang quickly grabs the bag and tells her that a loss is impossible. In fact, they made a massive profit this time. He excitedly tells her that she's basically his lucky star and even lifts her up in excitement. Li Lu becomes happy as well and says that as long as she can help the boss, she's satisfied. Chunyang tells Li Lu to remember one thing: they should stick to this price. From now on, they should trade for as many serums as the other side is willing to offer. Li Lu says that works out perfectly because the distributor also expressed interest in continuing to trade with them. Chunyang asks her to tell him more about that distributor's situation. After hearing everything, Chunyang slowly processes the information. Looking thoughtful, he says he understands now and confirms that the man is a Tier 9 enhanced human. Li Lu then says that if the boss thinks the risk is too high, they can always find someone else to trade with. But Chunyang shakes his head and says there's no need. Based on what she described, this man, Jinyan, actually seems like a very good partner. Li Lu asks why he thinks so. Chunyang explains that the man has 3 major advantages, and they happen to be exactly what they need. First, as a Tier 9 enhanced human, Jinyan has a much higher clearance level. That means he has access to better channels for trading higher-end goods, like the biological armor she mentioned earlier. Second, his goal is very clear. He wants to fight his way back into the core power circle of the Doctors Association. To do that, he'll need a large amount of resources, which means their cooperation could last a long time. Li Lu nods and says that actually makes a lot of sense. Then Chunyang mentions the third point. He says the third reason is very simple. Jinyan is a smart man. Li Lu looks confused and asks what he means. Chunyang explains that Jinyan could immediately tell that she wasn't the one truly in charge. Yet he didn't try to pressure her into making a deal right away. Li Lu lowers her head and says that was her fault. She admits she lacks experience and accidentally exposed a flaw. But Chunyang gently lifts her head and wipes away the tears in her eyes. He tells her not to feel discouraged because she already did very well. Li Lu smiles and thanks him. Chunyang then picks up the suitcase full of serums and says he'll take them for now. The rest of the discussion can wait until tomorrow. Just as he's about to leave, Li Lu suddenly stops him and warns him that he can't inject another serum right now. Chunyang asks why. Li Lu explains that there must be a certain time interval between each tier of enhancement serum. Normally, between Tier 1 and Tier 2 injections, there should be about a 3-day gap. Between Tier 2 and Tier 3, the interval should be more than a week. Chunyang asks if injecting them too quickly would cause side effects. Li Lu says of course it would. She explains that the body needs time to fully absorb the previous serum before taking the next one. Otherwise, the body simply won't be able to handle the strain and could break down. Chunyang is shocked when he hears this. He asks what she means and wonders how he's supposed to know when the serum has been completely absorbed. Li Lu explains that the person who injected the serum will naturally feel it. She says the body will give a very clear sense when the absorption is complete, so he'll understand when the time comes. Chunyang nods and says he understands. He tells her he'll see her tomorrow. Li Lu replies goodbye, boss. Soon after, Chunyang returns to the modern world, back at Wongai City People's Hospital. He appears again inside the bathroom stall. Holding the bag of serums, he feels extremely excited. He thinks the whole process went much smoother than he expected. To him, the wasteland world really is a treasure trove. He looks at the serum and thinks that with this healing agent, his grandfather will definitely get better. Meanwhile, In another part of the hospital, a doctor is speaking with Chun Yang's father. The doctor says she is giving this advice based on the actual medical situation and asks Mr. Chun to consider it carefully. Chun Yang's father quietly says he will think about it. Just as the doctor finishes speaking and prepares to leave, Chun Yang walks in and notices her. He wonders if she is his grandfather's attending physician. Chun Yang immediately turns to his father and asks what the doctor just said. His father sighs and explains that the doctor suggested transferring his grandfather to hospice care. Chun Yang is confused and asks what hospice care means. His father explains that it means processing the discharge paperwork and sending his grandfather home with medication to make his final days a little more comfortable. Hearing this, Chun Yang is horrified. He says that basically means telling his grandfather to go home and wait to die. If you want more, subscribe right now and turn on all the notifications.